Good morning, my dear ones. My name is Ellen May Sparrow, and I'm speaking to you from the creaky wooden porch of my little yellow house in Willow Creek, Kentucky. I'm 68 years old this spring. 68 years young, as my late husband used to say, and for most of my life I kept quiet about something that nearly broke me in half. But not today. Today I speak. You see, this porch has heard a lot over the years. The breeze here carries the smell of honeysuckle in June and the hush of snow in February. It's where I used to rock my babies, read letters from old friends, sip coffee with shaking hands after long, sleepless nights. It's a quiet place, peaceful. But the silence, it used to be heavy. It used to be the kind that settled in your bones and told you to stay small, to stay quiet, to stay hidden. Well, no more. There's a story inside me that's waited 50 years to be told. A story of pain, yes, but also of defiance. Of one girl's desperate fight to survive in a world that treated her as invisible, disposable, and voiceless. That girl was me. And before you click away thinking this is just another sad tale from a forgotten time, let me tell you, this story is also about hope, about healing, and about how even the most shattered voices can learn to sing again. But before we begin this journey together, I'd like to ask you for a small kindness. If my words find a place in your heart today, please consider subscribing to this little corner of the internet. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And, if you're comfortable, share something about your relationship with your parents. You'll be learning all about mine. Now let me take you back. Back before cell phones and podcasts and front-facing cameras. Back to 1956. When I was born in a sagging one-bedroom house near the creek that split Willow County in two. It was a time when women wore gloves to church and secrets like mine were buried deep beneath casserole dishes and polite smiles. I was born in silence. Not because the world didn't care, but because it had already decided I didn't matter. My mother, Margaret Ann, was 24 when she gave birth to me. She never once held my face and told me I was beautiful. Never once kissed me goodnight. She was the kind of woman whose perfume arrived 5 seconds before she did, whose heels clicked on hardwood like a warning bell. People in town called her striking, tall, raven-haired, with a voice like a jazz record and eyes that always seemed to be looking for a way out. I never knew my father. Margaret Ann told me once, when I was 5, that he had gone west and might return someday. At 7, she finally admitted he had died before I was born. Throat cancer, she claimed, though she offered no details. No pictures. No name on the grave. Just absence. A blank page where half of my story should have been. Have you ever felt like a chapter of your life was missing before it even began? It wasn't just his absence that haunted me. It was the lack of mourning. The way my mother talked about him, if she talked about him at all, like he was an inconvenience that had passed, not a man she once loved. She never wore black. Never lit a candle. Just moved on, as if I had been fathered by a ghost and raised by a stranger. Our house was cold even in the summertime, not because of the weather, but because of what wasn't said. We didn't hug. We didn't laugh. We didn't share breakfast at the table. We existed near each other. Her with her cigarettes and late nights, me with my school books and silent prayers. If I coughed too loudly, she sighed. If I tripped and scraped my knee, she rolled her eyes. Get up, Ellen, she'd say. The world doesn't stop just because you fell. That's how I learned not to cry. That's how I learned to bleed in silence. But children, no matter how unloved, still bloom toward the light. And for years I searched for it. In the sound of distant trains. In the smell of honeysuckle. In the rare smile of a teacher who noticed I'd done my homework in the margins of a paper bag. I craved attention. Not the kind you're warned about, but the kind that says, I see you. I care that you exist. And for decades I buried the rest. I built a life, brick by brick, atop a graveyard of memories I didn't dare revisit. Until now. Because if there's one thing age has taught me, it's this: silence is not strength. It's survival. And I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live. So come with me, dear one. Let's walk together through the past. Not to relive the pain, but to uncover the truth. Because in the truth there's light. And in the light we might both find healing. Now, shall we begin? I was 6 when I first realized other kids had daddies. Not just daddies, but fathers. Men who picked them up after school, who clapped from the bleachers at Little League games, who pushed them on backyard swings until the sky turned orange. It hit me on a Tuesday afternoon in 2nd grade when a boy named Curtis drew a crayon picture of his family. For stick figures under a bright yellow sun. Him, his mom, his dad, and his baby sister. When Mrs. Carmichael asked us to draw our own families, I sat frozen, staring at my blank paper. What was I supposed to do? Draw an empty chair? A shadow in the shape of a man? That day I went home and asked my mother if I could see a picture of him. My father. She was standing at the sink, scrubbing her red lipstick off a coffee mug, her black hair tied up high like a movie star. She didn't look at me. There are no pictures, she said curtly. Did he have a name? I asked. She dropped the mug, and it cracked in the sink. You ask too many damn questions, Ellen May. That was the last time I asked. What I knew of my father was this. His name wasn't spoken, his face wasn't framed, and his story ended before mine began. She once claimed he died of cancer before I was born. Another time, she said he'd left town for good, like a drifter in a song. The story changed depending on her mood, like everything else about her. What remained constant was the feeling that half of me was missing. Other girls grew up with bedtime stories and lullabies. I grew up with silence and slammed doors. I watched TV moms kiss their children on the forehead and call them sweetheart. My mother called me clingy and a tick when I tried to hug her. Once, when I was 9 and had a nightmare, I tiptoed into her room and touched her arm, whispering, "Mama!" She turned over, bleary-eyed and angry. "If you wake me up again, I swear to God I'll lock you outside with the possums." That night, I learned how to cry without making a sound. In small towns like Willow Creek, people don't ask questions they don't want answers to. Everyone knew Margaret and Sparrow had a baby out of wedlock. Everyone saw her belly swell but never saw a man beside her at church. Some folks whispered about that traveling banjo player who passed through the county fair. Others said the baby had been a mistake. I was the mistake. But no one ever said anything to my face. They just looked at me with that strange mixture of pity and suspicion, like I might repeat my mother's sins before I even knew what they were. At school, I became the invisible girl, the one with hand-me-down shoes and too quiet eyes. I never raised my hand, even when I knew the answer. I was terrified of being seen because being seen meant being judged. Being judged meant being labeled. And in a town like mine, a label could stick for life. I watched other girls get picked up by fathers who wore ties and smelled like aftershave. I walked home alone, dust sticking to my shoes, clutching a piece of dry cornbread wrapped in wax paper. One day, in 3rd grade, I drew a picture of a man with a guitar sitting under a tree. I told Mrs. Carmichael it was my father. She smiled kindly and said, "That's lovely, Ellen. What's his name?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I didn't even have a name to give her. The absence of my father wasn't just a fact. It was a void. It shaped the way I thought about myself, about love, about what I was worth. If the man who helped bring me into this world couldn't stay, what did that say about me? Sometimes I imagined him watching from afar. I pictured a kind man with strong hands and a sad smile, too broken to come back, but always thinking of me. I invented letters he might have written, folded them into my school books, even read them aloud to myself at night. My dearest Ellen May, I'm sorry I'm not there to tuck you in, but I'm watching the stars and thinking of you. You're brave, and you're smart, and one day you'll do something big. Love, Daddy. That was my secret comfort, my private fiction. The truth was, I didn't know if he'd ever loved me, or even if he'd wanted me. Maybe he died before he got the chance. Maybe he left on purpose. Maybe Margaret and never told him I existed. I'll never know. And that, I think, is the cruelest part. When you grow up without love, you start to believe you have to earn it. That if you're quiet enough, useful enough, good enough, someone might finally choose you. So I scrubbed floors. I folded laundry perfectly. I ironed my mother's skirts and laid her lipstick out before she went out on the town. I became the child who asked for nothing, hoped for everything, and accepted whatever scraps of approval came my way. But let me tell you something that took me 50 years to understand. You don't have to earn love that's real. You don't have to bleed for it, shrink for it, or beg for it. If it's real, it stays. And when it doesn't, you learn to become your own anchor, your own parent, your own voice in the dark. That lesson would come later. For now, I was still that little girl staring at a blank page, wondering how to draw a family that didn't exist. By the time I turned 8, I was the woman of the house. Not because anyone told me I was, but because someone had to be. My mother worked 5 days a week at a department store downtown, folding sweaters and selling perfume to bored housewives with diamonds on their fingers and boredom in their eyes. She came home tired, irritable, and always with a complaint. About the boss, the heat, the customers, the world. Dinner? That was my job. Laundry? Mine. Mopping, sweeping, scrubbing the bathroom tile with an old toothbrush? Mine too. I had a little step stool so I could reach the stove. I remember once burning my finger on a cast iron skillet while trying to flip cornbread. I cried out, just a little. My mother looked up from her vanity mirror, where she was applying eyeliner for whatever social outing she had that night. "For heaven's sake, Ellen May," she snapped. "You're not made of glass. No Band-Aid. No keys. Just silence and the smell of Aquanet." By the age of 10, I knew how to sew on a button, fix a leaky faucet, and budget the grocery money. What I didn't know was how to ask for help, how to express fear, or how to feel safe. Because our house, it wasn't a home. It was a stage. And every day, I was an unpaid actor in a play no one else watched. I tried hard to be perfect. Maybe if I cooked better, cleaned more, folded the towels just right, she'd look at me differently. Maybe I could earn a smile, a soft word, a trace of love. But all I got were criticisms. "Your hair's a mess. You walk like a farmer. You're too soft. Men hate that in a woman. You'll never make it on your own." And my personal favorite, "You're lucky I didn't leave you on a church step." I believed her. That's the cruel thing about children. They believe everything their parents say, even when it breaks them. We lived in a 1-story, 2-bedroom shotgun-style house on the edge of Willow Creek. It had chipping paint, a porch swing that creaked like an old man's knees, and a faint smell of mildew that clung to the wallpaper. My room was small, barely wide enough for a twin bed and a milk crate I used as a nightstand. On the wall above my bed, I had taped a page torn from a magazine, a picture of a golden retriever puppy inside a basket. It was the only thing in that room that made me feel safe. The house itself was like a mouth clenched tight, always bracing for the next outburst. And my mother's moods were like weather. Unpredictable, fast-moving, and often dangerous. There were good days, I won't lie. Days when she'd come home with a treat, a cherry soda, a new hair clip, a slice of leftover cake from the break room. On those days, I'd pretend. I'd pretend we were just two regular people, a mother and daughter, making it through life together. But those days never lasted. The moment I let my guard down, the storm would come back twice as strong. I remember once, I had gotten a 95 on a math test, something that felt like a miracle. I ran home, breathless, the paper clutched in my hand. She didn't even look at it. "Only 5 points short of perfect," she said, lighting a cigarette. "What did you miss?" That was the moment I stopped trying to impress her. I used to think that if I could just become useful enough, I'd become valuable. That the more I helped, the more she'd see me. But instead, it only made me easier to ignore. One evening, when I was about 11, I overheard her on the phone. "I swear, this girl's more like a housemaid than a daughter," she said, laughing. That night, I cried into my pillow. Not because of what she said, but because I realized it was true. I was raising myself. And yet, as strange as it sounds, I didn't hate her. Couldn't. Children don't know how. They don't see cruelty for what it is. They see failure as their own fault. I told myself maybe she was tired. Maybe she was broken too. Maybe love just looked different on her. So I stayed. Cooked. Cleaned. I folded the towels just right. I remember once kneeling on the kitchen floor, scrubbing spaghetti sauce off the linoleum, while she yelled from the living room about some show she couldn't hear over the clatter. My hands were raw. My knees hurt. I was 12. And I remember thinking, this is just what life is. This is what girls do. This is what I deserve. I didn't know better. Not yet. But life, in its twisted way, was preparing me. Teaching me the patterns of abuse so I would recognize them later. Building a resilience I didn't yet understand. And setting the stage for the storm that was about to walk through our front door with a duffel bag, a cigarette behind his ear, and a voice that would make my blood run cold. His name was Alan, and he would change everything. There was one place in Willow Creek that didn't feel like the rest of the world. It was a narrow corner store with faded green shutters and a crooked little sign that read, Colette's Flowers, EST 1948. The kind of place you might walk past 100 times without really seeing, unless you were looking for something soft in a life full of sharp edges. That's where I found her. Or maybe that's where she found me. Mrs. Colette was in her 70s by the time I wandered into her shop. She had silver hair tied in a bun that never quite held, wire-rimmed glasses always slipping down her nose, and hands that moved like music, calm, deliberate, gentle. The first time I stepped inside, I was 11, chasing the scent of jasmine that spilled out the open door like a secret. I pretended I was just browsing. I didn't have money, of course, just curiosity, and maybe, if I'm honest, a need for oxygen. She looked up from trimming a bouquet of hydrangeas and smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that makes you feel like someone's been expecting you. Looking for something, sweetheart? She asked. No, ma'am. Just flowers, I said. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Everyone needs something to bloom in their life. I started stopping by after school. First just to look, then to help. She never paid me, not in cash, but she let me water the ferns, organize seed packets, and carry boxes from the back room. In exchange, she gave me slices of lemon pound cake wrapped in wax paper and once, a tiny pot of violets with a note taped to the rim. For Ellen, hands that grow things. It was the first time anyone had written my name with kindness. At home, I was a nuisance, a burden. The reason my mother never found a decent man. At school, I was the quiet girl with second-hand shoes and silence in her eyes. But in Mrs. Colette's shop, I was useful, valued, seen. She taught me how to trim roses without bruising them, how to find the freshest lilies by the firmness of their stems, how to breathe through my nose when tying twine so my hands didn't tremble. Flowers know, she would say, if your heart's not right, they droop. If your hands are angry, they wilt. But if you're gentle, they bloom. One day, I asked her why she never got mad when I messed up, like dropping a tray of pots or spilling plant food all over the floor. She paused, looked me in the eyes, and said something I've never forgotten. Because you don't learn by being punished, honey. You learn by being believed in. I wish I could say her shop became a sanctuary. In a way, it did. But I still had to go home every night. Back to a house where nothing bloomed and no one believed in anything. Still, those few hours among stems and soil gave me something I couldn't find anywhere else. Hope. Hope that kindness wasn't extinct. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a place for me in the world that didn't require me to suffer for it. One rainy afternoon, I told her my birthday was coming up. She didn't ask how I'd celebrate, which I appreciated because the answer was, I wouldn't. Birthdays in our house were just another reminder that I existed. My mother once told me she only went into labor with me because she tripped on a step. But when I arrived at the shop the next day, there was a little box waiting for me. Inside was a small pin shaped like a daisy, the petals slightly chipped, but still shining. It was mine when I was a girl, she said. Now it's yours. I cried. Not because of the gift, but because someone remembered. Someone cared enough to mark my existence. Years later, when I studied psychology, I learned there's a term for what she gave me: corrective experience. It's when one moment of kindness begins to undo a lifetime of cruelty. When a single voice of support becomes louder than all the voices that told you you were nothing. That was what Mrs. Colette did for me, without ever knowing the full story. She never asked about my mother. Never asked why I flinched at loud noises or carried myself like someone waiting to be hit. She just let me be. And in a life where everything else was performance, that was everything. One day, I came into the shop and found her crying over a snapped orchid stem. Her hands trembled as she tried to tape it back together. "It's not the flower," she whispered. "It's the memories that fall with it." She didn't explain. I didn't press. I just sat beside her in silence. Because sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone who saved you is to sit with them when they're breaking. That moment taught me something else. That even the people who heal us carry their own grief, their own shattered stems. But still they bloom. Still they give. Still they grow something beautiful out of what was broken. Just like I would learn to do. Soon, much sooner than I was ready for, life would rip that piece from me. A man named Alan would move in. And the little girl who tended flowers would learn the true meaning of fear. But in my darkest hours, I would carry the memory of that shop, the smell of wet soil, the warmth of lemon cake, the sound of a woman who believed in me. That pocket of light would one day help me survive the dark. It was a Sunday. Hot, sticky, Kentucky August air. I was 13 and had just finished mopping the kitchen floor for the second time that day, trying to get rid of the muddy boot prints my mother had tracked in after another late night out. I'd cooked dinner. Meatloaf, boxed mashed potatoes, green beans from a can, set the table, lit the one candle we had, not because it was fancy, but because the overhead light had been flickering for weeks and gave me headaches. And then the front door opened. My mother came in first. Lipstick fresh, blouse pressed, heels too high for someone who claimed her feet ached all the time. Behind her was a man. "Alan," she said, like she was introducing a prize. "This is Ellen, my daughter." He was tall, broad in the chest. His face was half-shadowed under a trucker cap, and his beard was the kind of unshaven that looked intentional. He wore a worn leather belt with a buckle the size of a small plate and carried himself like someone who thought the room belonged to him the moment he stepped into it. I stood at the end of the hallway, barefoot and silent, a dish towel still in my hand. "Nice place," he said, though he didn't mean it. And then he smiled at me just a little, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. My stomach tightened. At dinner, he talked too loud and chewed with his mouth open. He laughed at his own stories, made comments about the way a woman should keep house, and complimented my mother's hair in a way that made her giggle like a teenager. He barely looked at me, but I looked at him. I noticed the deep grooves in his hands, the nicotine stains on his fingers, the way he touched my mother's back without asking, the way she leaned into it. That night, as I was washing dishes, she came into the kitchen and leaned against the doorway. "Alan's gonna stay with us a while," she said casually. I stopped scrubbing. "For how long?" "As long as it takes," she snapped. "We need help around here, and he's good to me. Try not to act so ungrateful." I wanted to say, "Help? I do everything in this house. You barely know him. He gives me the creeps." But I didn't, because girls like me didn't get to object. The first week, he tried to be charming. He brought home a slice of pecan pie from the diner he worked at, left it in the fridge with a note that said, "For the little housekeeper." He asked about school, told me I was growing up fast, said it like a compliment, but his eyes lingered too long. I didn't eat the pie. I stopped wearing shorts in the house. I locked the bathroom door every time I showered, even though the lock barely worked. And then the charm wore off. Started small. A complaint about the way I folded the laundry. A comment about the eggs being too runny. A grunt when I walked into the room, as if my very presence irritated him. "This girl just sits around and eats," he told my mother once. "She doesn't help pay for anything." I was washing the dishes at the time. I didn't say a word. My mother, to my horror, agreed. "She's old enough," she said, shrugging. "She could be doing more." As if I hadn't just cooked their dinner. As if I hadn't spent the afternoon ironing her clothes and sweeping the back porch. From that moment on, the house changed. No, let me rephrase that. He changed the house. Alan had a temper that simmered like a pot left too long on the stove. Quiet until it boiled over. If I left a glass in the sink, he yelled. If I forgot to wipe the counter, he slammed drawers. If I sat too long at the table, He banged the chair back into place when I stood. He had rules, unspoken ones that shifted daily. Don't make noise in the morning. Don't ask questions. Don't look him in the eye if he's been drinking. Always have coffee ready. Never correct him. Never talk back. And if you break the rules, you pay. One evening, I left a pair of shoes near the back door instead of in the closet. He tripped. Didn't fall. Just stumbled a bit. He exploded. "Are you trying to kill me?" he screamed, towering over me.
I forgot. I stammered.
He grabbed my arm. Too hard. His grip left a mark that bloomed purple by morning. My mother said nothing. She was on the couch, filing her nails. "She's clumsy," she muttered. Just like her father. That was the only time she'd ever compared me to the man who disappeared before I was born. And she did it to justify the man who was hurting me. I began walking on eggshells. Not literally, but close. Every step was calculated. Every chore double-checked. I scrubbed the kitchen until my knuckles bled. Just so he wouldn't accuse me of being lazy. I stayed silent. Small. Nearly invisible. But it didn't matter. Alan didn't need a reason to be cruel. He just needed a target. And I was convenient. Free. Powerless. Young. The perfect canvas for a monster. He never hit me again that month. But his words did enough damage. They bruised deeper. Stayed longer. At night, I curled up on my thin mattress in the back room, listening for his footsteps. Every creak of the floorboards made my body stiffen. Every laugh from the living room sent a shiver down my spine. I was 13, but I felt 100 years old. The girl who used to arrange flowers was gone. In her place was a shadow, thin, frightened, trying desperately to survive in a house that no longer belonged to her. I didn't know then what he was truly capable of. But I would soon. The worst night of my life was coming. And it would begin with a broken plate. The night started like any other. Dinner was over. Plates scraped clean. The air in the kitchen hung heavy with cigarette smoke and the lingering scent of fried pork chops. I was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, warm water steaming over my chapped hands. My back ached from standing too long. My mind wandered to the flower shop, how Mrs. Collette had let me clip lilacs that morning. I clung to those soft memories like a child clings to a blanket during a storm. That night, the storm came inside. Alan was seated at the table, nursing his third glass of whiskey. My mother, as usual, was flipping through a magazine, legs crossed, absent in every way a mother shouldn't be. I reached for a dish, slick with grease, and it slipped through my fingers. It shattered on the floor. Silence. A silence so thick it felt like time paused. Alan's chair screeched back. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I turned, mouth already forming the words, "I'm sorry," but he was already on his feet. "You clumsy little tch," he snarled. I stepped back. My heels hit the cabinet behind me. It was just a plate, but he didn't want an explanation. He wanted a reason. He stormed toward me, eyes bloodshot, the veins in his neck bulging. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking my head back until my eyes watered. "If you break one more goddamn thing in this house," he hissed, "I swear I'll put you in the ground." His breath reeked of whiskey and fury. I looked at my mother, just 10 feet away. She didn't even look up, didn't flinch, didn't care. Something inside me snapped. Not anger, not defiance. Something smaller, something sadder. Part of me gave up. He shoved me back. I stumbled against the counter, knocking over a jar of spoons. He laughed, a low, cruel laugh. "Maybe it's time you learned some respect," he said, lighting a cigarette with hands that didn't even shake. "You think this house is yours? You're just a freeloader, a mouth to feed, nothing more." I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But I did what I always did. I nodded, because I had no power, no voice.
No escape.
Yet, that night, I lay on my mattress in the back room, knees pulled to my chest, the sheet pulled up to my nose even though it was sweltering. I stared at the ceiling, eyes burning, but I didn't cry, couldn't. There were no tears left. Instead, I thought. I planned. If he touched me again, really touched me, I'd run. I didn't care where. Maybe to the flower shop. Maybe to the river. Maybe into the woods. Anywhere but here. But I didn't know then. The worst wasn't just coming. It was waiting. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My mother didn't speak to me. Alan didn't leave for work. He stayed. Watched me clean. Followed me with his eyes. Around noon, he cornered me in the hallway. "Think you're a little grown-up now, huh?" he said, flicking ash from his cigarette onto the floor I had just mopped. "Think I don't see how you look at me?" I froze. I don't." He stepped closer. I could feel the heat from his breath. "You're mine," he whispered. "You live in my house. You breathe my air. Don't forget it." Then he walked away, just like that. But he'd said it. "You're mine." Not like a daughter. Not like family. Like a possession. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the floor, every wind against the window, made me shudder. I thought about running. I thought about fighting. But I was 13, and I had nowhere to go. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and trembling. Alan drank more. My mother disappeared more often, sometimes for whole nights. When she was home, she barely spoke. It was as if she'd decided her survival depended on pretending I wasn't there. And maybe it did. But her silence was worse than his fists, because it told me I wasn't worth protecting. Then came the Wednesday night I would remember forever. Dinner again. Me cleaning up. Alan and my mother still at the table. He was already drunk. The rice was undercooked. He complained. Loudly. Slammed his glass on the table. I kept my eyes down. My hands moved quickly. And then, another plate slipped. Another shatter. And this time, there was no hesitation. He stood, fire in his eyes. I dropped the sponge and ran. To the backyard, hoping the night air, the open space, the distance would protect me. I was wrong. He followed. "Get back here," he roared. "You think you can just run from me?" I stopped under the old oak tree, heart thudding. He stopped at the back steps. And then he smiled. Cold, terrifying smile. "All right," he said. "Stay out here. But don't say I didn't warn you." He went back inside. I stood in the yard, trembling, the night heavy around me. And then, through the kitchen window, I saw it. He was talking to my mother. And she nodded. She nodded. Like she agreed. Like she approved. That night would lead to the unthinkable. A shovel. A hole. And the kind of darkness you don't come back from unchanged. But that's the next chapter. I don't remember walking back into the house. Only that my legs felt like they weren't mine. Like I was moving underwater. The world was quiet in that terrifying way. Just the sound of the rain tapping lightly on the roof, the distant croak of frogs, and the blood rushing in my ears. The kitchen was dim, yellow light casting long shadows on the floor. My mother sat at the table, smoking one of her long menthols, her gaze locked on something far away. When I stepped in, dripping with sweat and fear, she didn't look at me. "Mom," I whispered. "What is Alan going to do?" She inhaled slow, like my question was just another part of the air she'd learned to ignore. "If I were you," she said finally, not looking up, "I'd pack my things and get out of here, before he comes back." I stood frozen. My voice cracked. "Are you telling me to leave?" "I'm not telling you anything," she muttered. "But you know how he gets." "But I have nowhere to go." She shrugged. "Then maybe you should try that old flower shop. You like it so much." And in that moment, more than the yelling, more than the threats, more than even the bruises, something shattered. My mother, my only blood in this world, was handing me over. Not with a gun, not with words of hatred, but with indifference. She wouldn't protect me. She never intended to. I ran to my tiny room, my sanctuary turned prison, and shoved my few belongings into a school backpack. One change of clothes, a picture from 3rd grade, and the tiny violet Mrs. Collette had given me. I tucked the flower into my pocket like it might protect me somehow. I was halfway out the back door when I heard the pickup truck, the growl of the engine, the crunch of tires on gravel, then the slam of the door. I peeked through the window and saw him, Alan, holding something. It was long, heavy, wood and metal. Took me a second to recognize what it was. A shovel. My blood ran cold. He didn't look drunk. He looked focused. He passed by the kitchen window, and for one brief moment, our eyes met. And in his, I saw something terrifying. Calm. He was calm. Too calm. I crawled under the kitchen table, like I had when I was a little girl scared of thunderstorms. I wrapped my arms around my knees and squeezed my eyes shut, praying I'd vanish into the linoleum. The door opened. His boots hit the floor with purpose. "Where is she?" he growled. "In her room," my mother said.
Noche se taschen.
The footsteps came closer, then stopped. I could see his legs, his muddy boots. He bent down. His face appeared under the tablecloth, twisted in a sick grin. "Found you." He yanked me out by the arm. I screamed, struggled, but his grip was iron. My mother stayed seated. She didn't say a word. He dragged me into the yard, past the wilting hydrangeas I once tried to care for. Rain fell heavier now, soaking my hair, my shirt, my shoes. In the far corner, behind the old tool shed, the earth was disturbed. A hole. Long, shallow, fresh. I knew what it looked like before my brain could accept it.
Agrave.
"No, please," I cried, digging my heels into the mud. "You need to learn," he hissed. Then, with a shove, he pushed me in. I hit the bottom hard. The wind knocked out of me. The cold mud clung to my skin. I tried to scramble out, but he jumped in after me. What happened next is a blur of nightmare and memory. His hands, the weight, the smell of sweat and whiskey, my screams swallowed by the rain, the way I tried to leave my body, pretending I was back in the flower shop, arranging violets, breathing jasmine air. When it was over, he stood above me, panting. "Now," he said, reaching for the shovel. "You think about what you've done." And he began to throw dirt. Not a lot at first, just over my legs, then my waist, then my chest. I screamed, begged, cried. "Shut up," he growled. "I'm not gonna bury you all the way, just enough for you to remember." The rain soaked the dirt, making it heavier. Soon I couldn't move my arms. My neck strained to stay above the edge. He paused, looked satisfied. "I'll come get you in the morning," he said, "if you've learned your lesson." Then he walked away, left me there, buried, alive. I lay there all night, alone. The rain fell steadily, cold and constant. My face was the only thing above ground. Mud crusted to my cheeks, hair plastered to my scalp. I screamed until my throat burned. But no one came. Not my mother. Not a neighbor. No one. At one point, I saw the kitchen curtain move, her silhouette behind the glass. She looked at me, then pulled the curtain closed. Even in the earth I felt it. The betrayal. The abandonment. The truth. I had no one. At some point, I don't know when, I passed out. Maybe from shock. Maybe from cold. Maybe because my mind couldn't take it anymore. I dreamed of my father, a faceless figure with kind eyes and a strong hand, reaching down into the hole. "It's not your time yet," he said. "You have to fight." When I woke, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale blue. The birds were singing. The world had moved on. But I hadn't. Not yet. But I would. Because something inside me stirred. A tiny ember in the dark. Rage. Not just at Alan, but at her. And, for the first time, at myself for believing I had to stay. That was the moment I changed. I wasn't going to die in that hole. I was going to climb out. And when I did, I was going to burn the whole goddamn lie down. I don't remember how long it took me to dig myself out. It might have been minutes, might have been hours. All I knew was that my fingers clawed through the cold, wet earth until they bled. My nails tore. My shoulders screamed. My legs, numb from being trapped all night, refused to cooperate at first. But I didn't stop. I pushed. I kicked. I fought. Because I had made a decision. I was going to live. And not just survive, I was going to escape. By the time I dragged myself out of that grave, the sun was rising. Its first golden rays touching the muddy grass like nothing had happened. Birds chirped. The world went on. I stumbled toward the yard faucet and turned it on. I drank until my stomach ached, washed the caked mud off my face and arms. My body throbbed with pain. Bruises forming on my ribs, cuts on my legs, deep purple fingerprints on my neck. But it didn't matter. I was out, and I was not going back into that hole. Not figuratively, not literally, not ever. I slipped into the house through the back door. It was quiet. The clock on the wall read 5:47 a.m. They were still asleep. I crept into my room, peeled off my torn clothes, and changed into the only clean outfit I had left. Jeans that barely fit and a long-sleeved t-shirt. I pulled my hair into a ponytail and looked at myself in the broken piece of mirror on the wall. A stranger stared back. She looked like someone who had crawled out of hell. She looked like someone who would never go back. And that's when the idea came. There was only one chance. I needed them to sleep. Not yell. Not chase. Not drag me back. Sleep. Heavy, dreamless, unshakable sleep. I remembered the little blister pack of sleeping pills my mother kept in the kitchen drawer. She took them sometimes when her nerves were bad, or after Alan had a night of yelling. I found them tucked behind the bandages and iodine. 10 pills. I only needed 4, 2 for each. I crushed them with the bottom of a glass and dumped the powder into the sugar bowl. My mother always put 2 heaping spoonfuls in her morning coffee. Alan didn't take sugar in his coffee, but he always drank orange juice. I stirred 2 pills worth of powder into the carton. My hands shook the entire time, not from guilt, but from adrenaline, because I was finally doing something, taking back control. At 7:20, I heard the bathroom door creak open. Alan showered first, like he always did. My mother stayed in bed longer, like she always did. By 7:35, breakfast was ready. I had poured his black coffee and laid out the scrambled eggs and toast. I placed the orange juice next to his plate. I knew exactly how he liked everything. He walked in wearing a clean shirt, his wet hair slicked back, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He grunted. "Coffee hot. Just made," I said quietly. He sat down, slurped his drink. Then the juice. Then the food. Like clockwork. My mother followed 10 minutes later, yawning, hair still damp. "Morning," I said. "Coffee's on the table." She didn't respond, just sat, grabbed the sugar bowl, and stirred 2 heaping spoons into her mug. I held my breath, watched as she sipped, again, and again. 10 minutes passed, then 20. They were getting sluggish. Alan wiped his forehead. "Damn. Hot in here," he muttered. My mother blinked slowly, her eyes struggling to focus. I think I'll lie down," she mumbled. Alan stood, wavered. "I need air." He stumbled toward the front door and collapsed onto the porch swing. His head slumped forward. He was out. I crept into my mother's room. She was on the bed, one shoe off, already snoring softly. It worked. Now was the moment. I grabbed the backpack I had prepared the night before, the same one I tried to run with. Inside were my school ID, the violet from Mrs. Collette, and my class photo. I stuffed in the sleeping pill packet and, at the last second, my mother's old camera. It had a roll of film in it. I didn't know how much was left, but I prayed it was enough. Then I went outside, back to the hole. I took pictures of the disturbed earth, of my bruises, neck, arms, wrists, of the broken glass in the kitchen from the night before. I didn't know if they'd believe me at the police station, but they would see. They would see what had been done. Willow Creek's sheriff's office was a 30-minute walk. I took the back roads, kept my head down, prayed no one recognized me. When I arrived, the building looked like any other in town. Quiet, tired, sun-bleached. A single officer sat at the front desk, scribbling into a notepad. He looked up, and his pen froze. I must have looked like a ghost. "Can I help you, miss?" I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. "My name is Ellen Sparrow," I said. "I need to report a crime." He stood immediately. "Are you hurt?" I nodded. "My stepfather buried me alive last night." Silence. The pen dropped from his hand. And just like that, The silence that had ruled my life for so long ended. There are two kinds of silence in this world. The first is the kind that hurts, the one that comes when you're ignored, dismissed, or erased. It's the silence I knew too well. The silence of my mother's turned back, the hush of a house where pain was normal, the quiet ache of not being believed. But the second kind is sacred. It's the silence that follows truth. The silence that gives weight to the unspeakable. The stillness when someone finally listens, really listens, and lets the truth echo between you until the whole world feels changed. That was the silence I found at the Willow Creek police station. After I told the officer, Sheriff Daniels, his name tag said, that my stepfather had buried me alive, he didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't call my mother to clarify. He stood up, calm, slow, and said, "Why don't you come with me, sweetheart?" He led me to a small room at the back. No bars, no interrogation table, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a box of tissues someone had already opened. He brought me water. He sat, and he listened. I told him everything, not all at once. At first, my voice trembled so much I had to start over 3 times, but eventually, the words came. How Alan moved in, how the shouting started, how the touching followed, the threats, the whole, the night. I showed him the bruises on my arms, the photos of the grave, the bottle of pills I'd used to knock them out so I could escape. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, I sat in silence, waiting for the usual disbelief. The "are you sure?" or the "maybe you misunderstood." I waited to be blamed, or pitied, or passed over. Instead, he said 4 words that changed everything. "I believe you, Ellen." I broke. Tears came so fast I couldn't breathe. My hands shook. My chest caved. The weight of everything I had carried, alone, for years finally crashed down. But in that moment, I wasn't crushed by it. I was freed, because finally someone heard me. A female officer came in next, Officer Ramirez. She sat beside me, soft-spoken, steady, and warm in a way that didn't feel fake. "We're calling child services," she said. "We're also sending a team to your house right now. You did the right thing coming here." I nodded, though the words felt distant. I was numb, exhausted, floating somewhere above myself. They offered to take me to the hospital, but I refused. I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want anyone seeing me like that. So they let me stay at the station. Officer Ramirez brought me a blanket and a ham sandwich from the vending machine. "You're safe now," she whispered. And for the first time in years, I almost believed it. An hour later, they told me what happened when the officers arrived at my house. Alan had passed out on the porch swing. My mother was asleep in her room. The police woke them both. Alan, confused and still drugged, tried to fight them. He ended up handcuffed face down in the grass, yelling slurred curses at the sky. My mother? She cried. Not for me. Not for him. She cried for herself. Said she was scared. That Alan threatened her. That she didn't know how to stop him. That he wasn't always like that. They brought them both in. Alan was booked on multiple charges. Assault of a minor, unlawful imprisonment, attempted homicide. But what they discovered later shocked everyone. Alan wasn't just a violent man. He was a criminal. They found packages of methamphetamine hidden under the floorboards. Illegal firearms stashed beneath the bed. A list of names, people he sold to, people who owed him money. He had been using our house as a front for a drug operation. And my mother? She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to know she'd rather protect herself than her daughter. Child Services placed me in temporary care that night. A foster home on the edge of Willow Creek run by a kind woman named Glenda. Her house was small but smelled like cinnamon and laundry soap. Her husband worked at the post office. They had 2 kids of their own, both quiet and curious about me but polite enough not to ask. I slept in a twin bed with a pink quilt. The walls were pale yellow. The window looked out onto a walnut tree. It wasn't home, but it was safe. And safe was a start. A week passed. Then 2. Social workers came and went. They asked questions I couldn't always answer. They wanted to know about the bruises, the timeline, the history. They wanted names, memories, clarity. But what they really wanted, what they needed, was confirmation that my story held up. And it did. Because I had the photos, the dirt under my fingernails, the fingerprint bruises on my neck. But most importantly, I had my voice. And I wasn't letting go of it again. Then one afternoon, Officer Ramirez returned. She brought a notebook, a small blue one, tattered at the corners. It was my mother's diary. They'd found it during the search. "You should read this," she said. "When you're ready." I waited until that night. Alone, under the quilt, flashlight in hand, I opened the cover. Inside were pages of fear. He hit me again today. Said I was useless. Called me a whore. I didn't tell Ellen. She's too young. I want to leave, but he said if I do, he'll find me. Said he'll hurt Ellen if I try anything. Sometimes I think death would be easier than this. He buried her. I saw it. I did nothing. God forgive me. Page after page of regret, of terror, of paralysis. She had been a victim, too. Not like me, but not innocent. She had chosen silence. And her silence had nearly killed me. But for the first time, I saw something other than hate. I saw fear, and I saw something else. A sliver of remorse. Maybe that wouldn't be enough to forgive her, but it was enough to understand her. And in that understanding, I found something unexpected. Power, because I had broken the silence. And no one, not Alan, not my mother, not even the town, could take that from me. The day I walked into the courthouse to testify against Alan, I wore a thrift store dress 2 sizes too big, borrowed black shoes, and my mother's old necklace. A silver locket with nothing inside it. I wore it like armor. Not because it meant anything, but because I needed something, anything, to remind me I came from a story bigger than this man who tried to erase me. The courtroom smelled like sweat and paper. Alan sat across the room in an orange jumpsuit. His hair longer now, his eyes still full of hate. He looked at me like he always had. Like I was something small and in the way. But I wasn't small anymore. I sat up straight. I told the jury everything. I told them about the grave, the bruises, the nights I slept with one eye open and my soul half buried in fear. The room was silent when I finished. The good kind. The kind that gives your truth space to breathe. The jury believed me. Alan was sentenced to 37 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge read the verdict, I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat there, breathing. Alive. But the trial was only the beginning. The real work, that started after. Because surviving something doesn't mean healing from it. It just means you get the chance to try. And I had to learn how to take that chance. Ms. Ramirez, who by then I called Rachel, recommended a counselor in Nashville who specialized in complex trauma. Her name was Dr. Carol. She wore thick glasses and always had tissues on the table. But what I remember most was how she listened. Not like she was waiting for her turn to speak, but like I was saying something sacred. I saw her once a week. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. She taught me how to breathe through the flashbacks, how to recognize my triggers, how to stop apologizing for existing. It was slow, agonizing even. I wanted to be healed now, to wake up one morning and feel clean and whole and untouched. But healing doesn't work like that. It's not a destination. It's a decision. Every day you choose to keep going. Even when your legs shake. Even when your past claws at your ankles like it's trying to drag you back under. And with time, I started choosing. After 6 months in foster care, I moved into a group home for girls with protective status. That's the term they used for us, kids who had seen too much, survived too much, and still had the audacity to want better. We shared bunk beds, passed around hand-me-down books, and whispered secrets under the covers like any kids would. But we weren't just kids. We were fighters. Some had bruises still healing. Some had stories even darker than mine. But all of us were searching for safety, for meaning, for someone to tell us we weren't broken. We found that in each other. Late at night, we told the truth like it was a campfire. Soft, glowing, dangerous if handled wrong. And somehow, in that ugly little house, something beautiful happened. We began to believe that maybe we deserved good things. At school, things were harder. Kids whispered. Some called me grave girl when they thought I couldn't hear. But I didn't care, because for the first time in my life I was getting A's. I was staying after class to ask questions. I was raising my hand on purpose. And one day, my English teacher handed me back a paper with a big red 100 and a comment that said, "You have a voice. Use it." I stared at those 5 words for a long time. They felt like permission. I started writing, first in a journal, then short stories, then essays. I wrote about fear, about silence, about what it feels like to be a girl no one protects and a woman no one expects to rise. I didn't write to be famous. I wrote to survive. Every page I filled was another piece of myself I reclaimed from the dirt Alan buried me in. And the more I wrote, the more I dreamed. Dreamed of becoming something more than my trauma, more than my past. Maybe, just maybe, I could become someone who helped others out of their own holes. Someone who stood at the edge and said, "I've been there. I see you. I know how to climb." By the time I was 16, I had a plan. I would finish high school with honors. I would apply for scholarships. And I would study psychology. Because I didn't just want to understand my own mind. I wanted to help others understand theirs. I wanted to become the kind of adult I never had. The one who noticed, who cared, who believed. And so I studied. Hard. I stayed up late. I worked weekends cleaning houses to save up for application fees. I carried a backpack so heavy with books it left red lines on my shoulders. But I didn't mind. Because every step forward felt like revenge. Not just against Alan, but against the whole lie that girls like me don't make it. I was going to make it. And not just make it, I was going to matter. At 17, I was accepted into Vanderbilt University on a full scholarship. I held the acceptance letter in my trembling hands and thought about the girl I used to be. The girl in the back room. The girl in the hole. The girl no one came to save. And I whispered to her, "You saved us. You did it." She didn't answer. But I like to think she smiled. College was a different planet. Vanderbilt's campus was full of old brick buildings, tree-lined walkways, and students who had never missed a meal in their lives. I arrived with 2 suitcases, a laptop donated by a church group, and the kind of imposter syndrome that wrapped itself around my ribcage like a belt too tight. I didn't speak much in those first few weeks. I felt like an outsider, like a guest who didn't belong in rooms full of people who talked about skiing trips and summer internships while sipping cold brew and wearing clothes that cost more than my rent. But then I met Nora. She was my roommate, freckled, fast-talking, and fierce in a way that didn't need to be loud. She'd grown up in Philadelphia, raised by 2 moms, wore combat boots in July, and believed therapy should be free for everyone. She also believed me about everything. I told her my story one night after midterms, sitting on the dorm floor with textbooks spread like wings around us. I hadn't meant to, but something about her felt safe. When I finished, she didn't look away, didn't gasp, didn't pity me. She just said, "Holy SHT, you're AF ***NG warrior." And then she hugged me. That was the first time I felt what safety could look like in friendship. Later that year, I met James. He was a graduate student in social work. Soft-spoken, big-hearted, always asking questions and actually listening to the answers. He volunteered at the same youth center I did, helping teens in the foster system navigate college applications. We talked about trauma one afternoon, how it scars but also reveals. I told him I didn't know if I'd ever trust a man again. He nodded, didn't flinch, didn't push. He just said, "I don't need you to. I just need to be patient." He never touched me without permission, never raised his voice, never made me feel small. He showed me what earned trust looked like, not demanded, not forced, built, slowly, carefully, one moment at a time. We dated for 3 years before he proposed, on a bridge overlooking the Cumberland River, under a sky full of fireflies. I said yes, crying, laughing, shaking. Because for the first time, I wasn't saying yes out of fear or duty or survival. I was saying yes out of choice. But loving someone after trauma isn't a straight line. It's a road with potholes you don't always see until your wheels hit them hard. Sometimes, James would put his hand on my shoulder and I'd flinch without meaning to. Sometimes he'd raise his voice at a football game and I'd freeze, heart racing, transported to a kitchen where Alan once slammed a glass into the wall. I felt guilty, broken, like he deserved someone easier. But James would always say the same thing. You're not broken, you're healing, and healing is never a burden. I had to learn that lesson again when I got pregnant with our son. Pregnancy brought joy and terror. I worried constantly. What if I turned out like her? What if I froze? What if I failed? But the first time I heard my baby's heartbeat, everything changed. That tiny rhythm, thudding like a drum underwater, reminded me of my own. How many times had mine almost stopped? Beneath dirt, beneath fear, beneath silence. And yet here it was, still beating, still fighting, still alive. Motherhood healed a part of me I didn't know was still broken. Holding my son, later my daughter, felt like rewriting every memory I had of being ignored, neglected, unwanted. I kissed their bruises when they fell. I listened when they cried. I told them they were good and strong and safe, even when they messed up. Especially then. Because that's when kids need love the most. When they're scared they don't deserve it. I never told them everything. Not at first. But as they grew and asked hard questions, I gave them pieces. Age-appropriate truths. I wanted them to know strength doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. Strength means surviving what did and still choosing love. Still choosing to show up. Years passed. I earned my master's degree in clinical psychology. Opened a practice. Began to work with women and teens who had lived through what I had. Some couldn't speak. Some couldn't cry. Some couldn't even sit in the same room as a man. I didn't fix them. I believed them. That was always the first step. And sometimes the only one they needed to take the second. I called my method the Bloom Model. Named not after me, but after violets and jasmine, and every petal I held in my hand as a little girl who just wanted something to grow. The model combined trauma-informed therapy with body memory work, narrative reframing, and resilience training. It was clinical, yes, but also personal, because every time I sat across from a girl trembling in her own skin, I remembered me. And every time I helped her stand, I stood a little taller too. At 43, I returned to Willow Creek. The house was gone. A fire, someone said. Years ago. Nothing but foundation stones and weeds. I walked the perimeter of the yard, found the spot where the old oak tree used to be. Kneeling in the dirt, I ran my fingers across the grass. And I whispered, I buried a girl here once, but she didn't stay buried. She grew. A butterfly landed on my shoulder. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. I took it as a sign, a reminder, that you can be rooted in pain and still rise. You can bloom from the darkest soil. And you can choose every single day to keep growing. I'm 68 now. The porch swing creaks beneath me as I sway, slow and steady, like a metronome keeping time with memory. The sun is low in the sky, painting everything gold. I hear cicadas, distant laughter from a neighbor's grandkids, and the occasional bark from Daisy, my mutt who's more nap than dog these days. And there's a camera pointed at me, not a fancy one, just the old camcorder James used to record our kids' school plays. It's duct-taped to a tripod and aimed at my tired face. Because today, I have a story to tell. Not for me, for you. For the girl who thinks no one will ever believe her. For the boy too scared to speak. For the grown woman who still hears her abuser's voice in her dreams. This is for you. Because what happened to me almost swallowed me whole. But almost doesn't mean did. I start talking soft at first. About Oak Ridge, Tennessee. About a girl who thought silence was normal and bruises were her fault. About the grave behind the house. The rain. The pills. The police. The therapy. The years. About the way trauma doesn't end when the screaming stops. But healing begins when someone listens. I talk about Nora. About James. About my children and the nights I still check to see if the front door is locked twice, just in case. I talk about the clinic. The Bloom Model. The hundreds of stories I've heard since mine. Their weight, their pain, their sacredness. And I say this, If you're watching this and you've been through something that no one should ever go through, I'm so sorry, but I'm also so proud, because you're still here, and that means the story isn't over. I've lived a life I never imagined possible. One with casseroles and graduations and a bookcase full of psychology journals. One with laughter, real, deep, belly-shaking laughter. One with friendship and motherhood, and Sunday mornings where I drink coffee and forget, for a moment, that the world can be cruel. But I never forget entirely, because remembering keeps me soft, keeps me strong, keeps me useful. And that's why I tell this story now, not to relive the horror, but to offer the hope, that no matter how deep the hole, no matter who put you there, you can climb out, you can dig with bloodied nails, you can crawl toward the light, you can find people who see you, who believe you, who walk beside you when your legs can't carry the weight anymore. And you can become the thing you never had, a protector, a safe place, a voice. Before I end the recording, I look into the lens. I think about the little girl I was, the one under the dirt, praying someone would find her. And I say, they didn't find you, sweetheart. You found yourself. And that is more powerful than anything they tried to take. I click off the camera. The porch is quiet now. Only the wind remains, carrying my story, my truth, out into the world like pollen, like possibility. And maybe, just maybe, it'll land in the heart of someone who needs it. Someone who's still underground, still waiting, still reaching. And maybe it'll whisper to them, you're not alone. You can climb. And when you do, the sun will still be waiting.